Right then, so let's kick things off. So again, a huge warm welcome to the InMobi IDFA webinar EMEA 2021. Let me just start by giving a brief introduction to myself and the other speakers. So I've got the nice and easy job of moderating today's session. I'm Jessica Moyney. I'm the Sales Director for InMobi Middle East, Turkey and Africa. Alongside me, we have Ramita. She's the Head of Client Services for InMobi EMEA. And then we have Utkarsh, she's the Head of Product Marketing for the InMobi Exchange. So for today's agenda, we've tried to compile anything and everything of relevance related to IDFA into as few slides as possible, simply to make the most of your time. We're going to kick things off with an ATT framework, which is the Apple App Tracking Transparency Framework explained in detail, followed by the advertiser insights, so basically advertisers' understanding of IDFA. Alongside that, iOS 14.5 in numbers, so looking at things like adoption rate and opt-in rate this far. And then we're going to close off the session with what advertisers need to do, so probably the most practical and useful session of today. So just a few housekeeping rules. On the right-hand side, you're going to see an open dialog box. So feel free, if at any point through the session you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the box to the right. We'll pick them up at the end. And also throughout, we're going to be posing a few polls just to get your input and feedback. They are absolutely anonymous, so please do engage. And with that being said, Utkarsh, over to you.
Thank you, Jessica. I think let me kick off this webinar, I think, just talking a little bit about what ATT is. But before we talk about ATT, why not let's sort of try to understand what IDFA is and how it's being used today, and how and that can sort of tie back into how wide-ranging the implications of these changes will be. So IDFA actually stands for Identifier for Advertisers. It's something that Apple introduced back in 2012 when they sort of replaced what used to be known the UDID and gave this IDFA as a way so that users could actually reset their identifiers. This was at that point ironically came as a way so that users could, have the right to forget. Right to be forgotten rather out of these, by resetting the device IDs. It's not unique. IDFA is not unique. IDFA is unique to the Apple ecosystem. There is a corresponding ID in the Android ecosystem, which is the Android advertising ID. And both these kinds of identifiers sort of work in a similar way and fulfill like a few sort of functions that are very, very critical to the way we run digital marketing and the way we are able to sort of hit our marketing goals in this day and age. I think we'll talk about these three things. One is identity and targeting, the other one being efficiency and value management, and the third thing being measurement and attribution. So on identity and targeting, I think this is the most intuitive use case. Whenever we think of a brand, thinking of starting to plan their marketing strategy, I think the first question they try to answer is, who are we reaching? And IDFAs are one of the most accurate ways, has been one of the most accurate ways to reach users or consumers of a particular age group, a particular gender, inclined towards certain hobbies or interests, right? And the way this usually worked is ad tech companies and publishers and even advertising companies would sort of collect data of users across certain apps, across many apps and websites and their offline locations and whatnot, and would use machine learning to sort of build a profile. And all of this information, whether a user is a male or a female, what age group they would fall under, what kind of interest they would have. For example, are they sports inclined because they are browsing so many sports apps? All of this would be tied back to an IDFA on the Apple ecosystem. So, am I audible, Jessica, Romita? If you can confirm, I think there's.
Yes.
All right. So, I think there may be some issue at Mateo's end. But moving on. So talking about identity and targeting, and there was. So this being one of the key sort of use cases that an IDFA is able to address. The second use case is efficiency and value management. This is a slightly less glamorous use case, but equally sort of important because an IDFA help brands sort of make sure that they are not bombarding the same user with the same ads or the same creatives, for example, that could avoid brand fatigue or creative fatigue. They could ensure that the same IDFA or the same person would not be seeing the same creatives too often, and this would result in a better user experience as well for the consumer. This would also result in better returns for the advertiser because they would not be wasting money on impressions that would not ultimately yield benefit. So I think there are other sort of use cases where DSPs or SSPs would use an IDFA to make sure that there's no sort of fraud coming through IDFAs. They could monitor requests coming through multiple IDFAs. And they would see, let's say, if there are too many requests from a particular IDFA in too short a period of time, this would likely mean some sort of a bot traffic, right? It might not be a human traffic. So there are these use cases, less glamorous, but equally important use cases that the IDFA would enable a lot of these ad tech vendors as well as advertisers and brands to fulfill. The third use case that we'll come to is measurement and attribution. And so I think one of the greatest promises of digital marketing has been not just being able to reach the right users, but also being able to tie back whether those ads are driving any sort of business outcome, a relevant business outcome for the brands. Now think about, I mean, I think the performance advertising space seems very intuitive, where you have users seeing an ad, they installing an ad. Not only installing an ad, you could also track whether the user is ultimately going on to make a purchase if it's an e-commerce app, or going on to hail a cab ride if it's a riding app, right? So all of this could be done for performance advertisers. Brand advertisers could even go further and try to tie back offline actions. So they could show, let's say a footwear brand could show ads to their target consumers. They could go back and see how many of those consumers ended up, let's say, visiting a store, ended up buying making a purchase at those stores, right? So tracking in-store visits, sales back to a consumer would be done by an IDFA. And so if you think about this, an IDFA basically goes from trying to identify the right user back to sort of closing the loop on whether the marketing investments actually made sense or not. And that's where these ATT changes are going to be so critical. Now, ATT, as Jessica said, it's app tracking transparency. It's a framework that Apple introduced to sort of regulate the use of IDFA by marketing companies. Now, what they have done is ask the publishers that, you cannot use this IDFA, you cannot send this IDFA to be used for any marketing purpose, which is basically any one of the three purposes that we talked about, if the user is not giving their consent. Now, this is not a new thing. I think we've been hearing about user consent and privacy in a lot of contexts, in GDPR in EU and so on and so forth. In fact, a few years earlier, Apple introduced something called limit ad tracking, where they gave users an option to go to their device settings and opt out of all sort of tracking from all apps. In fact, we have about 20-25% of iOS traffic that actually runs through a limit ad tracking system, which means users have gone ahead and disabled all tracking on the devices. But what ATT does is it changes it on its head, because earlier users were opted in by default. You could have their IDFA by default, but now ATT regulates the publishers to must have sort of a consent from the user to be able to send this IDFA. So that changes a lot of things for advertisers. Now I'll just go to the next slide and talk about how like implications. Like we spoke about so many use cases. Now think of so many common use cases that we are so used to, right? Audience targeting and retargeting is now going to be possible only on the users who have opted in on those apps, right? Third-party measurement and attribution like in-store visits, brand lift, will only be possible for users who have opted in, right? UA-focused advertisers still have some sort of, I think, silver lining when it comes to measurement and attribution. I think they can use SK Ad Network for most of the campaigns, but the way they used to track earlier, the granularity at which they used to track in-app actions like KPIs much lower down the funnel, like a cost per action or a ride or a lead, that will not be the same as how they're used to in terms of IDFA. However, I think thing to note is a lot of the media metrics that we would measure for the top of the funnel campaigns, like video completion rate, click-through rate, viewability, etc., they will continue to remain as they are. So I think a lot of changes, not only technically for publishers and how they are regulating the use of IDFA, but also advertisers will sort of have to change their approach in how they've been running their campaigns, specifically iOS campaigns, right? So with the scope of these changes, we actually wanted to understand how advertisers are reacting to this, right? And we got some of these insights from an Advertiser Perceptions report. There was a survey for that was conducted back in December 2020. Now, keep in mind that this was conducted back in December 2020, which is still a few months after the announcement of these changes. It was supposed to, be enforced back in September last year, but was delayed to March. And yet, when we look at some of these insights, it's actually very, very interesting. About 90% of advertisers were aware of the IDFA being deprecated, right? They were aware that there is some sort of change, may not have been very familiar with it, but they were aware of some of these changes. But if you look at, how many of them had started reacting to this, you will realize that I think that only about 40% had started formulating any sort of an alternative strategy for targeting and measurement, right? And that's very interesting, because I think though we were still 2 or 3 months away from the deadline, a lot of these changes are very take time, right? And so that's and I think given the timing of the survey, so many months after the announcement was done, it was very interesting to see this sort of insight in that light.
Yeah, so Utkarsh, I'm just going to jump in here, and I'm just actually going to share a poll. Again, it's just on the right-hand side. I think it'd be really interesting to understand from our attendees, given that this was taken back in December, it'd be really interesting to understand at what stage of planning our attendees are when it comes to tackling the IDFA policy changes. So firstly, have not yet started. Secondly, are still in the early stage discovery. Thirdly, in the early stages of formulating alternative strategies, or last, have a full-fledged strategy in place right now. So we'll just give it 20, 30 seconds just to populate. So, I mean, as this is just populating, I mean, I think it's worth saying here as well that, if you are still in the early stages, or if you haven't yet started planning for these IDFA policy changes, we'd be really keen to kind of have a one-on-one after this session at a later stage, just to kind of discuss that a bit more. We can obviously give you some advice based on what we're seeing across the industry, across some of our other clients that do have these full-fledged strategies in place, and maybe some of the feedback that we're getting from them. But yeah, I think most people have answered now. Okash, looks quite good.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question, and it's great to see the needle also move, right? From, I think we have more than half, I think 65% people who are already sort of in the range of, or rather in the zone of sort of already formulating some of these strategies or have a full-fledged strategy in place. And I think it just shows how I think advertisers have also sort of gotten serious about planning for the next phase as well. I think we'll talk a little bit about like what we are seeing very even from a very short distance here. As we've moved closer to the deadline, we have realized that advertisers, and this is also something that we recommend, is basically advertisers shifting some of their iOS budgets to other platforms, right, which have more lenient privacy policies. It could be web in the short term while cookies are still there, and you know. And it could be CTV for the brand advertisers. For a lot of performance advertisers, I think Android will still continue to be important. And of course, while taking care, maybe making use of SK Ad Network on the iOS side. So, but I think one thing I would like to sort of also stress on is, while we are sort of shifting or recommending shifting some of these budgets to different platforms at this point, have to sort of stress that this is like a short-term mitigation move that will help in the first few months, but this is going to be like a long-term change, and it's important for us to figure out what are some of the long-term things that we can do to continue reaching these users, because these users are so valuable. You cannot sort of stay away.
Not to stop you every slide, but I'm just going to ask another question to our attendees. So, sharing another poll. I'd like to understand, just before we move on, what the different tactics are looking like to address these IDFA changes, if any. So, given a few different options here, so universal IDs and ID graphs being one, publisher data-enabled audience targeting, and or contextual targeting.
To come in. But I think it's very interesting. I'll also move to the next slide and sort of try and compare the results that we had, from this survey that was conducted way back in December 2020. I think results will of course differ, because I think these surveys had multiple answers. I mean, respondents could select multiple answers here, so of course there's going to be some deviation there. But it's very interesting, I think, that in both the survey results that we are seeing from December 2020, as well as the poll that we are conducting right now, I think universal IDs, ID graphs, and first-party data being collected by publisher that can also be used to enable stronger audience targeting is going to be very, very key, I think, in tackling this post-IDFA world. I think more than half of the respondents are opting to sort of use one of those two strategies as the key driver. And very interesting to also see that contextual targeting has become sort of come back in vogue, and we'll now have I think a world. I keep hearing people say world going back to contextual targeting, but I kind of think that this is a misnomer, because a lot of what we know of contextual targeting from, let's say, in the TV world and whatnot has changed so much, right? There are so many more data signals within the app. There are so many more data signals about the user's location and their device and whatnot, that I think there's scope for like with all the advances that we have made in terms of machine learning and being able to make sense of these signals, that I think contextual targeting will become very, very powerful, much more powerful than what we have known from, let's say, the world that we know in TV. And I think CTV and mobile phones and all have sort of contributed to that, right? So many more data signals. Well, I'll move on to the next slide. And before we sort of move to how we should sort of how we are recommending to tackle these changes, which is also sort of the meat of the webinar. I just wanted to spend some time talking about how the rollout has been, and so everybody is keen to look at some of these numbers about what is the opt-in rates and whatnot. So let's just talk about this. So iOS 14.5 was rolled out by Apple in, I think, late April. And what is interesting to see is, unlike a lot of other iOS versions, the rollout has been slow. It's not been on auto update. And that sort of reflects in the number of the proportion of requests on InMobi Exchange that are coming from iOS 14.5 or later versions. And at this point, I think we have data from a week back. And at this point, we have seen about 11-12% of requests actually coming from iOS 14.5 or above. It is going to change, however. Apple recently, like 2-3 days back, also started scaling iOS 14.6. And that, from very early indications, is a more aggressive rollout than 14.5. So this number is sure to change a lot more dramatically in the next 4 weeks or so. Let's talk about, for the supply coming through iOS 14.5, what is the opt-in rates that we are seeing? And I think that's another that sort of dictates what audience targeting and whatnot is possible on what pool of users, right? And from evaluating gaming apps from gaming requests, requests from gaming apps, we see that about 20% of those requests have an opt-in, have consumers opting in, whereas for non-gaming apps, this is more in the range of 30-35%. And that's an interesting insight to take, because I think it'll be, it tells you that users are going to be sort of discerning enough, to provide their consent to apps that they trust, publishers that they trust, and that will mean that the stronger relationships that users have with the publishers or the apps, the more chances that they'll get there. So I think that was an interesting insight to take. However, one thing to note is that just like Apple's update has been slow, the ATT prompts that publishers are putting out seeking user consent, that has been also slow as well. Publishers are taking their time out to test various messaging prompts, test various strategies to educate the users, so that they have a greater chance of an opt-in. And what this means is, I think this number will likely change, hopefully trend upwards only from here, but I think it'll likely level out in this sort of a range as well, like a 20-35% range. So so that's about opt-ins. We'll talk a little bit about SK ad network, though. One of the key things that we have seen is publishers have been extremely proactive about tackling these changes, and and not just publishers. I think generally the ad tech vendors, the ecosystem, DSPs, and everyone has been super proactive about reacting to these changes. And SK ad network adoption is sort of a living proof of this. Today, more than 80% of our inventory on InMobi Exchange is measurable by SK ad network, and that gives a huge boost to DSPs, looking to run performance and UA-based campaigns, right? So that's a very good sign for us, I think, as it comes from the supply side. And I'm sure advertisers will start to figure out more of their mitigation strategies and then their way forward, to sort of tackle the IDFAs going away. I think with that, I've spoken quite a bit. With that, I'll sort of pass the mic to Romita, who can move on to the next topic here.
Hi, everyone. Before starting the discussions, just want to check if you guys are able to hear me. Jessica? Okay. So, okay. Now that we have understood the role of IDFA and the adoption of SCAN, let's try and understand what impact this new system is going to have on measurement of our campaigns. So in this flow chart, what we have done is we have tried and captured all the key campaign KPIs. I'll move from left to right. So say your campaign KPI is somewhat around brand list study or a footfall study. These kind of studies highly depend on device IDs. Now, in the post-IDFA world, because there won't be any kind of device IDs possible, we recommend that you shift more budgets towards Android campaigns because such studies will require a minimum threshold to conduct such kind of surveys. So yeah, moving to the next kind of campaigns, which is around reach or frequency. For such kind of campaigns, again, we would request you to move your budgets toward Android. And of course, we can always reach out to the iOS opt-in users. Moving to the UA side of things, say your campaign KPI is to do more towards app installs or post-install events, we would recommend you to integrate with SCAN directly or through MMPs, where MMPs will serve as your reporting aggregators. And the next thing that you should do is again try and push your budgets higher towards Android while keeping on testing with the new SCAN network for iOS, because SCAN is new and it will take some time to evolve to the IDFA world. In the post-IDFA world, it will take some time. Moving to the last type of campaigns, which is more around top funnel matrix, which is CTR, VCR, or viewability. Such kind of campaigns will have no impact, so we can run the campaigns as it is.
It would be really interesting here as well, just for attendees' input on how you guys are dividing your budget. So I've just posted another poll. So yeah, I mean, either number one, focusing on Android whilst testing iOS, or continuing to focus on Android and iOS equally, or at least similarly to, IDFA, and as you were then.
That's really good to know. We'll move to the next things. So what we have done is we have tried and divided the advertisers or campaigns into branding and UA to help you understand better. So say you are a brand advertiser, your campaigns are more to do with branding. Now for such kind of activities, what is the most important thing that was there in the earlier stages or in the IDFA world was user targeting or audience targeting. Now, with the post-IDFA changes that we have, we do not have any kind of device IDs to target and reach the kind of audiences that we have been doing so far. So for campaigns, for any kind of branding activities, we would highly recommend everyone to use contextual advertising or contextual targeting. For example, we have IAB categories, which divides the publishers into different kinds of categories, say sports, music, entertainment, news, and so on. So we can still target using these categories, which is a kind of contextual targeting, and reach out to the right kind of users. The second thing that we can do is we should focus more on KPIs from now on, whether it be VCR or CTR or viewability. Let's try and increase exposure more towards publishers who are actually getting these kind of KPIs, rather than trying to do it the earlier way, which is user level targeting and reducing the audience and then moving forward. Because there is no other option left in the post-IDFA world. The second part of discussion that I want to touch base is around creatives. Now, creatives has always been an important part of any branding activity. Now, with the changes in the scan world, we have nothing but creatives, which has become really more important, because the creative is a thing that can completely change the user intent and still bring you those actions or deliver those KPIs that you have been looking so far. So yes, focus more on creatives from now on. We'll move to the UA side of things. For UA, like I explained earlier, a scan integration is a must. We will have to integrate with scan directly or through MMPs. It's up to you guys. If you do through MMPs, then they would also act as your reporting aggregators and will help you with different kinds of reporting dashboards. So that should help you. The second thing that I want to really focus on is how do you want to run your campaigns now? Now in the IDFA world, a UA campaign used to be on CPI or on CPA. So for advertisers who used to focus more on CPA, the thing is really tricky now. This is because in the IDFA world, the partners had different kinds of attributions and different kinds of funnel view in order to optimize and run campaigns and deliver those CPAs. But in the post-IDFA world, the kind of attributions that we receive and the kind of funnel is no longer the same. For example, in the IDFA world, we used to get install to post-install event or action window of on an average 7 days. And sometimes it used to even extend to 30 days, depending on what kind of events the advertiser is looking at. But in the post-IDFA world, that no longer exists. The window has reduced to around 24 hours. So what happens is, suppose I'm a user and I have installed the app, and I don't do any action for 24 hours, and post 24 hours, I go and sign up. That sign up event doesn't go back to the partner who has actually shown me the ad and made the install. So the number of events are reducing. The number of attributions that used to come earlier will no longer come. So this is a kind of example I wanted to put to explain you how the optimization techniques and the scale will get impacted. So these kind of changes will not only impact your scale, but will always impact your optimization techniques and how to handle the campaigns. So would recommend that any campaign that you're going to start on scan should start with a CPM or CPC for 2 to 4 weeks, so that you have the maximum exposure on the right kind of audience and the right kind of users. Try to optimize towards the install rate. Understand what kind of install rate actually works in a post-IDFA world, and then shift your campaigns to CPI. Once you have the CPI in place and run campaigns on CPI, then optimize towards the action that was required. Understand what kind of action rate works in this new system now, because it may not be the same like the earlier, given the system and the new window that is associated here. Try to understand what kind of new CPAs will work or what kind of new install to action rate will work, and only after testing move finally to a CPA. So this is what I would highly recommend all advertisers to follow if they are doing user acquisition.
Yeah, so Ram, just jump in here. So I'm just going to post another poll that I've just created. So for UA campaigns specifically, so for user acquisition campaigns, how are you as our attendees planning to move forward post IDFA? So will you continue to focus on CPA, so things like registration, sales, transactions, etc., or will you be looking to move to a cost per install model or CPM, CPC?
Okay, I can see the results of the poll. It's more towards CPI. That is what was expected. I mean, understand that CPM and CPC may not be always possible for every advertiser, but yeah, glad to see that CPI is what everyone is looking at rather than a CPA, because it is the most difficult kind of campaign any partner would try to run. Okay, moving to the next things, which is around consented traffic. Now that we will have lesser consented traffic, the demand for such traffic will grow. And so we expect the payouts to also increase in future. The last part, which I have touched based upon earlier, which is on Android campaigns. So given that the entire scan network is new, and any new network will require some time to evolve and give you the kind of results that you're expecting, would highly recommend to shift higher budgets towards Android to ensure that your marketing plans are not disturbed. So keep shifting towards Android, test the scan network, and once you have enough results and understanding, you can move your campaigns to the IDFA world, wherein you had equal or a good mix of iOS and Android campaigns. With this, we'll hand over the discussion back to Utkarsh. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I think sort of to round off the discussion, actually, I think it's very important to understand that this is not going to be the end of it. I think this is only like one of a series of events that we have seen. We've seen GDPR come in EU. We've seen CCPA in the US, in California, and we already have been sort of preparing for cookie deprecation in Chrome. Remember that Safari has already done it so long back. So this is like just like one of a series of events that's part of a trend towards a more privacy conscious world. And I think what I'll sort of want to stress on is that this is a change, and as the ecosystem, like right from publishers to advertisers and the partners supporting this ecosystem, I think it's important for us to plan for this, prepare for this, and build towards a future where I think privacy is more in the hands of consumers, and how do we create the right value exchange for between consumers and brands. So I think that would be sort of probably the best note to end this I think webinar on. But I think, Jessica, if you want to have some questions.
Yeah, so we've had quite a few questions come in, so thanks a lot, guys. The chat's still open, so if anything comes to mind throughout, then just pop them in. We'll address as many as possible. So firstly, if users won't opt in, is scan the only option on iOS? Ramita, maybe do you want to help us with that?
Yeah, sure. So again, if the users are not opting in, the scan is the only way out. So yes, scan can track conversion events, The only thing is, would request the advertisers to ensure that when you're integrating with Scan, you integrate the right kind of conversion events. For example, if you have purchase as an event, try to integrate as many events as possible. Say right from install to sign up to add cart to purchase, because that will help you understand at what level the user has dropped or has gone to what level. So yes, we will be able to look into the conversions, but like explained earlier, the attribution will come to the partner or not completely depends on how early the user actually makes the action, because there's no longer a 7-day or a 30-day window for install to action. That gets reduced to 24 hours.
Perfect. Utkarsh, maybe you can address, where will IDFA opt-in rates end up, do we expect?
I think though we have only seen limited adoption for iOS 14.5 and the ATT prompts has yet to be rolled out to the full sort of user base, I think we'll again probably see it level it out between 20 and 35%. I think it will vary across categories. We will see, I think, gaming apps towards the lower end of that range, and probably non-gaming apps towards the higher end of the range. The more trustworthy an app, the better the opt-in rates will be. So I think, yeah, somewhere it's also going to be an evidence of how the more premium the publisher, the better relationship it will have with the user and better opt-in rates as well. So yeah, I think 20 to 30, 35% is a fair estimate depending on the category.
Then how about, are we able to target audiences that were built out prior to iOS 14.5? Maybe Ramita, do you want to pick that up? So we have, are we able to target audiences that were built out prior to iOS 14.5?
Yes. So what happens now is the audiences that were created earlier, that will stay. The audience segment will stay, but it all depends on how the users are opting in or opting out. If the users are opting themselves out from every app that they're using, then it won't be possible for us to have the same kind of audience that we used to have earlier. But say the user opt outs from certain apps, but not from every app. So we will still have the user. So what will happen predominantly is the audience targeting will remain, but the kind of frequency or the kind of users we can reach to will reduce.
Yeah. And then how about, how are brands thinking of universal IDs in a post-IDFA world? Utkarsh?
Be extremely important, I think, even in the in-app world. So now I think one thing to note is universal IDs became very popular after the cookie deprecation move started to come in. And I think a lot of the web publishers are going to sort of implement a login-based mechanism to get a universal ID. I think what is after the IDFA changes, it will also force the publishers on apps to basically implement something similar. And I think what it will do is allow advertisers to, reach users not just on apps and not just on web in a siloed way, but also actually reach them across multiple channels and track and measure actions across multiple channels. The only caveat here being, again, all of these universal IDs will still be subject to each of these privacy regulations. It could be IDFA changes. So, for example, only consented, opted-in users will be part of the universal ID map. or it could be GDPR. So for example, people who are not giving their consent on websites will not be part of that. So yeah, I think it will be still subject to these privacy regulations, but for the 20-30% of users, whatever that number may be, um, they will represent like a very exclusive pool of users, and brands will end up paying more to reach them just because of them being able to track so much and reach them out accordingly.
Yeah, but then Ramita, back to you. So just back to the opt-in. Would we need that for retargeting as well?
How retargeting works is completely on device IDs. So we would require opt-ins for any kind of retargeting campaigns.
Perfect. And then I think just a couple more. Okay, so maybe Utkarsh, you can take this one. So ATT consent message is quite suspicious. If the user doesn't understand the message properly and they take it negatively, then she will definitely not give consent. Terms like track is quite suspicious and the user may opt out. This may increase the percent that people are opting out and have a significant negative impact. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Apple has been fairly strict about the exact string that comes up on the ATT prompt, but it has been largely flexible about a few things. One, the explanation that you are able to provide why you are tracking the user. Two, I think it is not mandated. It has mandated the number of times you can show the prompt, which is just once, but it has also been largely flexible about when you show that prompt. What it does is, let's say as a user, if I've started using an app and I've, let's say, had a week of usage and I know that this app is useful, I'm more likely to provide my consent as opposed to not. A third thing where there is still some flexibility is, and that publishers are using, is priming the users about the consent before actually showing the consent pop-up. So think of using a tile in the app, or think of using an email, a push notification or an email message, for example, to educate users about, and where they can be a lot more flexible with the language. I think one very interesting resource on the web is this website called attprompts.com, and I can share the link here. But it's a collection of a lot of these prompts that different apps are using to get user consent, and it's remarkable because the variety that you will see across so many apps and how they are explaining the need for consent is quite amazing. And so there are like lots of good examples to take, learn, and implement on your own. Yeah.
And then maybe Utkarsh can take this one as well. So is InMobi already supporting fields that have been released as part of the SK Ad Network version 2.2? Most importantly, for view-through attribution for iOS campaigns via SK Ad Impression class and fidelity type parameters, etc. Whew, that was a bit of a mouthful.
From a product roadmap perspective, definitely SK Ad Network 2.2 is a part of our plans. We have not yet started supporting it, but right now it's work in progress. And I think towards the end of, I think in about a few weeks, we should be able to support View 3 attribution through Scan 2.2. So I think, I think no sort of deviations on that.
And then Ramita, what are the maximum events we can track for Scan?
Scan from Apple, we can set a maximum of 64 events on Scan.
Perfect. And then I think one last one. Will we be able to track conversion events for Scan campaigns even if the user has not opted in? Ram, maybe you can take that one. Yeah. So I said, will we be able to track conversion events for scan campaigns, even if the user has not opted in?
Yes, that is what is the role of scan. So if the user has not opted in, scan can still measure what kind of events are they generating.
Perfect. So I think that's it. I think we've managed to address all of the questions. So perfect. Thank you so much, guys, for attending. Stay tuned on email. We're going to share the recording of today's session alongside the slides. Feel free to distribute to your colleagues or additional partners and clients, etc. We've just shared our emails in the chat window, so feel free to reach out one-on-one if you want to set up a session. And yeah, thanks for joining. Stay safe. You get 5 minutes back of your day.